were 10 children. She knew each by name. They turned to stare at her, their heads swiveling all at once, like a flock of birds turning in mid-flight. Savina felt a flicker of apprehension, a recognition of the foreignness of their minds. The Omega subjects were savants so talented that their skills crossed the threshold of the physical to a realm where Savina could not travel. Boris, a 13-year-old with eyes so blue they appeared frosted, seemed almost to be studying her. His talent was an eidetic memory coupled with a retention that frightened. He even remembered his own birth. "Why were we not allowed to go with the others?" he asked. More heads nodded. Savina swallowed before answering. "There is another path for all of you. Do you have your bags packed?" They just stared. No answer was necessary. Of course their bags were packed. The question displayed the level of her own nervousness. Before her lay the power that would fuel the motherland into a new era. And deep down, Savina knew such a power remained beyond her full comprehension. "We will be leaving in an hour," Savina said. Those 10 pairs of blue eyes stared back at her. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned as one of the technicians joined her. "General Major," he said, "we're having some glitch with the blast doors on the other side of the tunnel. If you could advise us how to proceed." She nodded, glad to focus her mind upon the problem. She followed the technician back to the staircase. Still, she felt those 10 pairs of eyes tracking her, cold and dispassionate, icy in their regard. To escape their judgment, she hurried down the stairs. "Open the doors!" Monk called to Constantine. From inside the control station, the boy nodded. Electric motors sounded, and large steel gears began rolling the blast doors out of the way, splitting down the middle. Constantine came running over to him, out of breath. 5 minutes, the boy warned. Monk understood. Constantine had sent the tunnel's digital camera system into a diagnostic shutdown and reboot. The clever kid had engineered a 5-minute blackout. They had that long to evacuate the children from the train before the cameras were back online. There was little else he could do. The master control station lay at the other end of the tunnel. Once the subterfuge was detected, the other station would kill the power to Constantine's shack. They had only this one shot. As the doors parted, Monk squeezed through, followed by Constantine. Marta also loped after them. The old chimpanzee wheezed with exhaustion, but she didn't slow, even passing Monk. The old girl knew they had to hurry. 100 yards away, the train rested on the tracks. Monk ran toward it, hopping a bit on his wounded leg. Constantine called out in Russian, yelling at them to get off the train and out the blast door. The boy waved both his arms. "Just clear the train," Monk said. "I must get moving as quickly as possible." Monk jangled alongside the train as he ran. He carried 2 assault rifles over his shoulders, each with 60-round magazines. Constantine had already given him a lesson on the manual drive mechanism for the train. It wasn't much. Get in the front cab, shove the lever up. Reaching the train, Monk trotted along one side, Constantine along the other. "Everyone off the train!" Monk shouted. "Out the doors!" Constantine echoed his orders in Russian. Still, chaos ruled for a full half-minute. Children yelled or cried. Hands grabbed at him, milling and jostling. But the kids were also well-trained to follow orders. Slowly, the tide shifted. The children began to drift down the tunnel toward the doors. No longer crowded underfoot, Monk reached the last car, a covered cab. He leaped through the open door and went to the front end. A small driver's seat was flanked by a green and red stick. Green for go, red for the brakes. A small dashboard displayed gauges and voltage readings. Monk did not have time for finesse. He leaned out the window. "Constantine!" The boy's voice echoed to him. "Clear! Go!" Good enough. Monk shoved the green lever forward. Electricity popped, casting a few sparks into the darkness ahead. The train lurched forward, then began to roll off down the tunnel. 4 minutes. He had to get this train to the other end of the tunnel before the camera system rebooted. It was up to Constantine to herd the children out of the tunnel and close the blast doors. Monk had instructed the boy how to jam the gears so that the doors would remain closed. Constantine also had one other task. Monk had confiscated a pair of the miners' radios. Once Monk reached the far doors, he would signal Constantine to open them. If all went according to plan, Monk would have the advantage of surprise and 2 fully loaded assault rifles. While likely a suicide mission, what choice did he have? The children were safe for the moment, but if Operation Saturn succeeded, how many millions more would die? Monk had no choice but to storm the master control station, guns blazing. Initially, he had considered sabotaging the mine site, but Constantine had paled at that suggestion. The charges, 50 of them, were primed with radio detonators. Even if he could scale the half-kilometer of shaft in 4 minutes to reach them, any mishandling of the explosives risked setting them off. So the matter was settled. With a rattle of wheels, the train sailed down the dark tunnel, lit by occasional bare bulbs. The front cab also had a single headlamp, which cast a glow ahead of him. As the train trundled faster and faster, Monk noted kilometer markers on the wall. According to Constantine, the tunnel ran 4 kilometers long. Monk found himself holding his breath, counting off a full minute in his head. Along the right side, he saw the number 2 stenciled into the wall. Halfway there. At best, he would have less than 30 seconds to spare. Not great, but not bad. Then the lights went out, as if the hand of God had clapped. Under Monk, the train sighed, as if echoing his despair. Without electricity, the train rolled to a stop in the pitch darkness. Behind him, from the back of the train, a child screamed in raw terror. Monk's body clenched. He knew that voice. Piotr. Savina stared at the bank of darkened monitors in the control station. She shook her head. Minutes before, one of the technicians had summoned her down here, worried about a glitch in the system, something to do with the blast doors at the far end of the tunnel. By the time she'd got down here, the cameras were offline, running a diagnostic subroutine. No one had ordered it. Suspicions hardened her veins. Something was wrong. Rather than sit idle, she took a preemptive move and cut all power to the tunnel. MC-337, Savina said. There's a substation over at the mining complex. One of the technicians, an electrical engineer, nodded to her. And as I recall, there's a camera built into the control shack over there to allow you to communicate with technicians on the other side. The man nodded again. Then his eyes widened. It's on a system independent from the tunnel. It was a precaution engineered in case of breakdowns, like now, leaving the 2 stations still able to communicate. Bring up that camera, she tapped one of the monitors. The engineer typed rapidly at his computer. A few moments later, the screen snapped to life in grainy black and white. The camera was small and utilitarian, angled above the control board of the shack to give a good view of the operator on that side. Savina leaned closer. Out the shack's open door, the camera caught a milling of children in the cavern beyond. Many children, the ones who had boarded the train. Savina struggled to comprehend when a taller boy stepped into view of the camera. He was tall, dark-haired, with a long, angular face. Her fingers tightened. She knew that boy. Constantine. What was going on? With all that had happened this morning, she'd had no time to follow up on Lieutenant Borsakov's hunt for the American and the 3 children. She watched Constantine wave an arm and call silently to the crowd of children. Borsakov had obviously failed. But what were they doing over there? She searched the crowd, looking for the American and the other 2 children. She sought one child in particular, the one she wanted back. Piotr screamed as the blackness smothered him. His eyelids stretched wide, searching for any light. Marta held him in her strong arms. The 2 had used the confusion at the other end of the tunnel to sneak aboard the last car and hide. Piotr knew he had to stay with the man. But the darkness... Pyotr gasped, drowning in the Black Sea. He rocked and rocked while Marta tried to hold him. It was his nightmare come true. He'd had the same dream often, where his shadow rose up and consumed him, smothered him until there was only darkness. The only way to defend against it was to set himself on fire, to burn like a torch against that darkness. Then he would wake screaming. Other children said they saw him on fire in their own dreams. At first he thought they were making fun of him, but after the first few times they all started looking strangely at him, seldom talked to him, rarely played with him. Teachers grew angry too. They scolded, didn't let him have sweet cakes with honey, said he upset the other children to the point that no one did well on their tests for days afterward. They blamed him for scaring everyone. And it scared him too, down to the bones, and that was only a dream. This darkness now was no dream. Panicked, he strained to escape it, but it was everywhere. He sought light where there was none. Even that path terrified him, but it was better than the smothering inkiness. Out of the darkness, pinpricks of light appeared like fiery needles punched through black cloth, wheeled into being by his terror. Just a few, then more and more. He stared upward as the starry landscape spread and pushed back the darkness. But he knew the truth. These were no stars. As Pyotr strained, his heart fluttered like a trapped bird. He stared upward as the stars grew brighter, swelling larger as they fell closer. He knew he should turn away, but his eyes opened wider, as did the darkness inside him. It also sought the light, howling out of the dark pit, needing to be fed. Stars began to fall faster and faster, a few at first, then others followed. From all directions they swept down upon him, crashing toward him. He heard the cries and felt the hammering hearts. They filled him with their light. He fell backward as the night sky collapsed upon him and lit his core on fire. Distantly, he heard a simian howl of warning, because Marta knew his secret. In those waking moments after his nightmares, when he woke screaming, it wasn't just fear, it was also exhilaration. Something was dreadfully wrong with the children. After cutting the power, Savina had continued to study the camera feed from MC-337. Though she had no audio, it was plain the children remained agitated, milling in confusion, some crying, most walking or standing shell-shocked. The only one who appeared in control was Konstantin. He moved among them, appearing into view, then disappearing again. Savina kept a watch to see if Pyotr was among them. Though she had 10 Omega subjects, if the boy was there, then one of the children in view dropped to the floor. A neighboring child turned to the slumped child, then she also fell, as if clubbed. More and more children collapsed. Panicked, one boy ran past, then he too succumbed. The technical engineer also noted the same. "Is it the neurotoxin?" Savina stared, unsure. The radiosensitive compound was inert unless exposed to high doses of radiation. The readings at MC-337 had never been that high. A moment later, Konstantin reappeared. He carried a limp girl in his arms. It was his sister, Kiska. He turned straight at the camera, his eyes full of terror. Then Savina saw it, like a light snapped off in his eyes. The fear vanished to a dullness, and down he went. It wasn't the neurotoxin. Konstantin and Kiska hadn't consumed the medication. A thump sounded from overhead, then another, and another. Savina stared up. Oh no! Turning, she ran for the stairs. She flew up them 2 at a time. Her back cramped and her heart pounded with a lance of pain. She burst into the room where the 10 children had been waiting for her. They had all collapsed, in chairs, on the floor, heads lolling, limbs slack. She rushed to Boris, knelt beside him and checked the pulse at his throat. She felt a weak beat under her fingertips. Still alive. She rolled him over and lifted his eyelids, which hung at half-mast. The boy's pupils were dilated wide and non-responsive to light. She climbed back to her feet and stared around the room. What was happening? Chapter 20. September 7th, 2:17 a.m. Washington, D.C. Painter hurried down the hall. He didn't need any more trouble, but he got it. The entire command bunker was in lockdown mode after the attack. As he had suspected, after the fiery death of Mapplethorpe, the few remaining combatants ghosted away into the night. Painter was determined to find each and every one of them, along with every root and branch that supplied Mapplethorpe with the resources and intelligence to pull off this attack. In the meantime, Painter had to regain order here. He had a skeleton team pulled back inside. The injured had been transported to local hospitals. The dead remained where they were. He didn't want anything disturbed until he could bring in his own forensic team. It was a grim tour of duty here this evening. Though Painter had employed the air scrubbers and ventilation to clear the accelerant, it did nothing to erase the odor of charred flesh. And on top of resecuring the facility here, he was fielding non-stop calls from every branch of the intelligence agency, both about what had happened here and about the aborted terrorist act at Chernobyl. Painter stonewalled about most of it. He didn't have time for debriefings or to play the political game of who had the bigger dick. The only brief call he took was from a grateful president. Painter used that gratitude to buy him the latitude to put off everyone else. Another attack threatened. That was the top priority. And as the latest problem was tied to that matter, he gave it his full and immediate attention. Reaching the medical level, he crossed to one of the private rooms. He entered and found Kat and Lisa flanking a bed. Sasha lay atop it as Lisa repositioned an EEG lead to the child's temple. "She sick again?" Painter asked. "Something new," Lisa answered. "She's not febrile like before." Kat stood with her arms crossed. Lines of worry etched her forehead. "I was reading to her, trying to get her to sleep after everything that had happened. She was listening. Then suddenly she sat up, turned to an empty corner of the room, called out the name Pyotr, then went limp and collapsed." "Pyotr? Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yuri mentioned Sasha had a twin brother named Pyotr. It must have been a hallucination." While they talked, Lisa had retreated to a bank of equipment and began powering them up. Sasha was wired to both an EKG and EEG, monitoring cardiac and neurological activity. "Is her device active?" Painter asked, nodding to Sasha's TMS unit. "No," Lisa answered. "Malcolm checked. He's already come and gone, off to make some calls. But something's sure active. Her EEG readings are showing massive spiking over the lateral convexity of the temporal lobe, specifically on the right side, where her implant is located. It's almost as if she's having a temporal lobe seizure. Contrarily, her heart rate is low and her blood pressure dropped to her extremities. It's as if all her body's resources are servicing the one organ." "Her brain," Painter said. "Exactly. Everything else is in shutdown mode." "But to what end?" Lisa shook her head. "I have no idea. I'm going to run some more tests, but if she doesn't respond, I can think of only one possible solution." "What's that?" Kat asked. "Though the TMS implant is not active, the spiking EEGs are centered around it. I can't help but believe those neuroelectrodes are contributing to what's happening to her. Her electrical activity is frighteningly high in that region, as if those wires in her brain are acting like lightning rods. If I can't calm her neural activity, she may burn herself out." Kat paled at her assessment. "You mentioned a solution." Lisa sighed, not looking happy. "We may need to remove her implant." That's where Malcolm went to make some calls to a neurosurgeon at George Washington. Painter crossed and put an arm around Kat's shoulders. He knew how attached she had become to the child. They had lost many lives protecting her. To lose her now. "We'll do everything we can," Painter promised her. Kat nodded. Painter's beeper buzzed on his belt. He slipped his arm free and checked the number. The Russian embassy. That was one call he had to take. Gray should be landing at Chelyabinsk in another few minutes. As he glanced back up, Lisa waved him away with a small, tired smile. "I'll call you if there's any change." He headed for the door. Then a sudden thought intruded, something he had set aside and not yet addressed. He frowned questioningly over to Kat. Earlier, he said. "I don't know if I heard you correctly." Cat looked at him. "What did you mean when you said Monk was still alive?" Epilogue. The boy sits by the window and stares out at the twilight world beyond. He is not ready to go out there yet. He still has much to adjust to in his new home. It fits him poorly and makes it difficult for him to think. He can see his reflection in the glass. Dark hair, small features, a familiar face. But it does not yet feel like his own. That too would come in time. As he stares, he watches the leaves falling past the window, drifting on the wind. There is no fear now, even as more leaves fall. That which lies deep inside him fills in the spaces with shadow and shape, formed out of memory. What comes is still more familiar than his own reflection in the glass. He knows it was the face he once wore. He still remembers the darkness, a black sea swimming with lights. He remembers the dying sun in the middle, strangled away so that others might fly and shine. But in that last moment, the boy who had once worn this body had kept a secret from them all. As he left that dark sea to places beyond, he pulled another light out of harm's way and dropped it into that empty dark sea, so it might live anew. Outside now, more leaves tumble, and shadows of memory fill in gaps, forming the true face of the one who wore this body now. This old face would be forgotten eventually, but not the boy who gave up his life so something new could be born. Often in his dreams, he sees that boy running over fields, topping a hill, waving back, then gone. So happy now. The new boy who sits in the chair stares out the window. Sometime he will run again, too.